We're not sharing war stories today, Erin.
No.
No more war stories.
You know, that could take 15 podcasts, I'm sure.
I know. Well, we might do it again someday, but not today.
What do we want to talk about today, Lucas Ferrer?
Medical entrepreneurship. So, Erin, give us a breakdown of what you're up to.
So if there's a problem somewhere in the middle of that, what is that poor person to do? They don't want to hurt a patient, and they've got a very finite amount of time that is corporately dictated by their overlords. From the time that person hits the door into the chair on the machine, you have 12 to 15 minutes max. How do we remedy that? We know from the literature that area puncture, which is what we're talking about, blast in the same spot over and over, just hunt and pray, get in. We know that that's inferior. The turnover for those folks is as high as 35% annually, right? So 1 out of 3 of your folks, poof, disappeared. Maybe that was a superstar, but is just tired of watching people bleed out and crazy things happen. But when you do the math, what it comes out to is that we're spending close to $10 billion in the system to manage 500,000 people.
Kind of like when we're going to do that lady that we know we've done 10 angios on, but it would be dumb to not look at your old angios, right? So this is more about, here's where we've been, take a look at it, micro interpretation. Okay, I know where I'm going to go.
Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
Ratings we've had in a while. I think it was very raw. I think it was very real and very raw, and I appreciate you being that open.
Sure.
So, but anyway, today, what do we want to talk about today, Lucas Ferrer?
Medical entrepreneurship and Erin's project. So, Erin, give us a little breakdown of what you're up to.
So, you know, we got into the war stories and everything else last time, kind of going through the career. And, you know, after I left the Navy, I started into private practice down in Jacksonville, Florida. You know, I was looking for practices that were on a coastline in the South. That was what I was interested in. And this just was one of those things that popped up, and it was fortuitous, you know, better lucky than good. And sometimes I'll just take that lucky and just go with it. I think out of that, and the fact that when you're in the Navy, a lot of times you're sort of voluntold about things. Okay, Doc, you're going to run the department. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you got 15 employees and a $2.5 million, $3 million budget. Don't screw it up. Okay, so it's a lot of in your face. It's finance at the point of a spear. So, you know, you learn pretty quick about who you need to talk to and the questions you need to ask and whatnot. And I think that was just additive when I got into private practice because, you know, I'd spent 15 years in what is ultimately managed medicine, you know, in the truest sense. And that's military medicine. So I wanted independence, and the group provided that. And I think that sort of fed that sort of notion about know your business, understand your business, understand, as I tell my sons, you know, understand, you don't necessarily have to have it all, but understand where the money goes, why it goes there, and how it works, and how it can work for you as it works for other people, et cetera. Just educate yourself to that. You know, you may have interest in something else. I mean, one of my sons is a sound engineer in Nashville. And so, you know, that's not in his wheelhouse as far as his education is concerned. But he's smart enough to educate himself about what he needs to be doing to take care of himself, so that ultimately, I told him, I said, sooner or later, you're going to turn around and you're 65 and you want to retire. What are you going to do? You know, and there are people that I know, you probably do too, physicians that say, well, shit, I'll practice till I'm 75 or till I drop. I love doing what I'm doing. And that's great. But this is, I don't know about you guys, but this is a young man's game. And I say young man's, young woman's game, a young person's game, in the sense that I've had 2-level disc replacement in my cervical spine from hanging my head for 20 plus years, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I've had partners that have gone out on disability related to those kinds of ergonomic issues. And so it's real. And so thinking through all that, I thought, well, I got to educate myself about how all this stuff goes, because someday I too want to retire. But more importantly, I'd always thought, look, I want to leave whatever it is that I did better than I found it, if it's possible. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there are forces that will disallow you from doing so. But, you know, as far as medicine is concerned, I just, the opportunity to get involved with the startup that I'm involved with, you know, on the inside of it, as it were, was really kind of happenstance. You know, I was shown an idea, a concept from an interventional radiology colleague of mine. It's been 3.5 years ago. And when I saw it, I was, immediately it moved me to say, hey, this makes sense. Like this isn't a gadget. This isn't a notion. This isn't a pie in the sky thing. This is practical. We could make this work. Like this could really make a difference. And it had to do with dialysis management. And, in our private practice here in Jacksonville, we were the only show in town as far as it relates to doing dialysis access. Other than a couple of the smaller hospitals, we really owned it. And so I did a lot of it. I did, 200-300 fistulas a year, fistulas, grafts, whatever. And then we were doing a lot of outpatient stuff in our OBL, managing them after the fact, or managing other people's stuff after the fact, as the case may be. And you've heard the stories. We all say the same thing. The running joke when I was a resident and a fellow, one of my bosses would say, we measure it with a micrometer, and the dialysis unit cuts it with an axe. And it was kind of tongue in cheek, and it was always a little bit pointing fingers at the dialysis center. But come to find out years later, and really getting into the space and understanding that these dialysis centers are not run by clinicians. I mean, they're run by clinicians in the sense that they have a medical director oversight, but they're run by nurses. And the people that are at the table side or the chair side, as the case may be, are techs and nurses. The nurses may have a clinical background, but many times the techs don't. 12, 18 weeks ago, they could have been an over-road trucker or barista at Starbucks. And so now they're being asked to do, access. They're taught, a general concept of this. And every one of the bigger companies, and there are 3 big companies that do dialysis, will do a little bit of, rudimentary training for them. But then it's really mostly just OJT, right? You get there, on-the-job training. What is the next guy doing? What is this person who's in charge of me telling me how I'm supposed to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very haphazard. And so while we measure it with a micrometer, they're not cutting it with an axe because they don't care. They're cutting it with an axe because they don't have the tools necessary to be more precise and be more educated about what it is they're doing and why it matters in the way that they do it. Because we all know, and the data is very clear, that if you access a dialysis fistula or graft in the same place over and over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to wear a hole in it. You're going to create a pseudoaneurysm, and then out of that is going to all be the secondary complications of that. On the inside, you're also creating an injury mechanism, and so how do we heal that? With scar. And if we scar on the inside, like we tell all of our patients, it may not be plaque, it may just be scar, but it's still choking off the flow, and that's compromising your ability to dialyze. And we all see the same mistakes made over and over again.
Surprises me, sorry to interrupt you, man, but what surprises me about that is that that's how they are actually trained.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, like the famous fucking button
is one thing, but even beyond that, to your point, I
button
think
turns into a little mountain that turns into a little massive pseudo, and they keep poking it and poking it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then we're there repairing a 2 a.m. bleeding fistula. Right. But it's just bonkers that's
right.
Because again, to your point, right? One of the things that I've learned in my older age is criticizing openly, but not trying to meet people halfway is dumb, because it just means you talk shit, but you're not offering a way forward. But when you realize, hey, this is how they're taught, and this needle is all they got. And we're not like, there's no ultrasound, there's no trick, and then they're taught to do it poke and poke and poke. Of course, it becomes easier because once you create a little pseudo, it's so easy to go in the same spot and always get good flows. But obviously, that's not a sustainable way. And if you're going to do this for, 5, 10, 15 years, it's not a sustainable way. And then all we do is fix broken plates.
Yeah, you're even coming at it from a point where you're at a disadvantage even by what you just said, because you're educated beyond even the problem. Like, you're already thinking about downstream effects. You're thinking about think about it this way. Take 5 steps back. They're not sure about the depth of the fistula. They're not sure about the size or the width of the fistula. They're not sure they understand fully about how different anatomies will vary in terms of, structurally, corkscrews or turns or twists or whatever, or, rogue side branches that will happen. So they're really flying blind. And we've been doing it the same way since 1965. Okay, let's do the math on that, guys. 61 years that we've been doing dialysis through a surgically created access. And we've been doing it the same way over and over and over. And what have we done? So the paradigm has been surgeon creates the fistula. Patient goes into the dialysis unit. In the dialysis unit, it's a black hole. A bunch of stuff happens. They dialyze, they get accessed, things go on. They come out of the black hole back to either the surgeon or to an interventionalist of some variety to try to work on the fistula to get it back to a functional status. It's got a problem with it. They send it. You try to do what you can to fix it, buff it up, and you send it right back into the black hole, back into the same injury mechanism to start the process again. And we've over-engineered in our literature how we create fistulas. God knows you could spend years reading about different techniques for creating and that sort of thing. And we've over-engineered the back end. We've got $1 jillion worth of stents and wires and catheters and balloons and drug-coated this and fancy schmancy that to try to fix them. But we've never gone into the center where the action is actually taking place, where the problem lies, to say, how do we manage the problem? So if you are a dialysis tech with, not really a clinical background person, and you're just following a process, you're a cook, not a chef, right? You're the physician of the chef. You can riff on anything, right? Oh, I'm out of salt. All right, we're going to use this instead. You do what you do. But these folks are not clinical. It's process. I do this, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and the process is done. What happens if A, B, C, D, or E, somewhere in there, the rails come off, or we come off the rails? That's what I'm trying to say. So if there's a problem somewhere in the middle of that, what is that poor person to do? They're left going, I'm not really sure. They don't want to hurt a patient. They don't want to have a problem, and they've got a very finite amount of time that is corporately dictated by their overlords. From the time that person hits the door into the chair on the machine, you have X amount of time. And that's usually anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes, max. Well, that person at the door isn't walkie-talkie like you or I. In many cases, they're in wheelchairs. They come in stretchers. They're infirm. They're old. They're frail, whatever. And so the time crunch is there for them. So when they get to the point where they're actually doing the access, they're going to go where somebody else was before because it's easy. 8 times out of 10, the patient's telling them, well, when Jerry hits me, he goes here and here. Mm-hmm. And that's what they do because that's how that thing works. But it's just adding to the problem. Okay. How do we remedy that? How can we nudge a technician who is not clinical into a better practice pattern? We know from the literature that area puncture, which is what we're talking about, blast in the same spot over and over again in a given area puncture, just hunt and pray, get in. We know that that's inferior to what's called a rope ladder technique, where you're actually varying those points up and down the fistula scale, as it were, right? That literature's out there. It's been studied. We know it works. It's sound. Nobody does it. Why? Because nobody's doing follow-up in these units for training and education. The turnover for those folks is as high as 35%, depending on the literature you're looking at, annually, right? So 1 out of 3 of your folks, poof, disappeared. Maybe that was a superstar, but is just tired of watching people bleed out and crazy things happen. I mean, it's incredibly stressful for these non-clinician types, so their turnover is going to be high. So we've got to give them a mechanism to guide them into a better technique. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to use ultrasound. Ultrasound is great, and we all use it. God knows, it's fantastic. But it's expensive on the front end. You got to have more than one in a given center because you've got multiple patients in multiple chairs going at multiple times, right? So you've got to have more than one if you're going to do it consistently. And the upfront cost is prohibitive for most of these centers. They can't afford 2 or 3 or 4 of these things. I don't care how big or small they might be. What if you could map out that fistula in such a way that as the patient comes in and you onboard the patient, you, the tech, put the patient in the chair, you put their arm out at an anatomic position with the fistula centered where you want it to be in that picture, with the arm in the anatomic position, and you take a picture of it. Next to that picture is a little card that has a little QR code, and what it is a standardization so that no matter what screen you're on, you can measure centimeters, inches, whatever, and it's standardized. Make sense? So that way there's no, variability in that regard. When you go to do your access, you're going to access venous and arterial, right? 2 points of access, one going in, one coming out, back to the machine and back to the patient, okay? Pardon me. So if they record the arterial and the venous, and then on that picture, they press arterial and they mark a spot, and then they press venous and they mark a spot. Now on that picture, you have recorded what those 2 access points were for today. 2 days from now, they're going to come back and they're going to see those 2 access points recorded on there. They're both going to say 1 on them because the last 3 points that we'd have in our program are labeled 1, 2, and 3. So you know where you've been in the last week of access. And it's going to be red. And both of them will be red. 2 weeks from now, that's going to turn to yellow. 2 weeks later, it's going to turn to green. 2 weeks after that, it's going to disappear. But you're accumulating more points along that same pathway of various ages. Accumulate all those points for 30 to 60 days. And then what we can do is we can take them all and we can use almost like a rheostat where you kind of, you phase in, phase out. We can show them a heat map of exactly how much usage they've had along the course of that fistula to show them where the hot spots are and things to basically be avoided. So we're not telling them where to go. We're telling them where they've been so they can make a better decision about where they're going to go next. We don't necessarily have to tell them. As our company continues, as our program develops, we think that we will ultimately be able to, using a little bit of large language, kind of learning and large scale learning, we may be able to actually then tell them the next time predictably go here and here. But that's not what we're doing right now. Our focus is in how do we change this access behavior? Because if we can push everybody naturally towards rope ladder technique, we know that 9 will get you 10, and we're going to have to collect data to prove it, that the outcomes are going to be better over time. Less time spent out of the chair in some center getting an intervention, et cetera. Because we know from the statistics from CMS, we know that there are over 500,000 people dialyzing in the United States alone, and that 70 to 80% of them, on average, annually will need an intervention on their fistula. And that cost runs anywhere from $18,000 to $35,000, depending on the payer mix. It's pretty broad. Cut it in the middle. But when you do the math, what it comes out to is that we're spending close to $10 billion in the system to manage 500,000 people.
Yeah,
that's not sustainable. And you know as well as I do that the blunt hammer of the Fed will come to make a difference and change that. And it's going to start getting real interesting as far as how dialysis gets paid for. Remember, in 1973, when we started paying for dialysis with Medicare, there were 10,000 patients on dialysis. That's it. 10,000.
Wow.
There are 50 times that now, and that number's growing 4 to 5% a year. And, so we can talk about artificial kidney, or we can talk about, engineering new kidneys and tissue engineering, and that's fantastic, but that's not today, and it's not going to be tomorrow. We've got to figure out what to do with these folks because we know that their access is their lifeline. And if they don't manage it well, we're putting their lives at risk.
Erin,
talk to us. This as cost saving to the system.
Yeah. Talk to us about, let's talk a little bit about the journey. So you were practicing, you're a busy private practice. Somebody comes in and shows you this idea because they wanted you involved or just happenstance? And then how did that personal relationship develop? And how did, you decide that you wanted to come in and convince them that you were the right candidate?
Sure. Well, I had already been, my financial guy calls me a closet philanthropist, I like to get involved in things, and invest in things that number one makes sense to me, that are in my space, so that I understand what's going on, but that I think will actually move the needle. And I've invested in a couple of other companies along the same lines, but that was just investing. I wasn't really involved in it. When this was shown to me by my colleague Shannon Beersley, I was blown away by it, and I said, "Dude, this is." I like this. I said, we can work with this. This can be something that we can make a difference with. And I think he was showing it to me. It was funny. He showed it to me through an intermediary friend of ours. I think he was worried I was going to go, this is crap.
Yeah.
And just throw it out. He didn't want to take the negative hit for that. But I told him, I said, no, you get Shannon on the phone. You tell him we're going to talk. Let's see what we can do with this. And it was still in concept back then. And so, they say with these startups, you need about a 5-year timeline from when you first really get started to ultimately get to some kind of fruition. And we're along that pathway, 3.5 years in, and we're trying to make all the right moves and check all the right boxes as we go along. But for me, it was just in trying to figure out, how does this stuff work? We're not business people. So understanding where the mistakes can get made. The scariest part is not knowing what you don't know. Like, what question should I ask? What person should I talk to? Who should I get some information about this? Or, how should I manage this given problem when we're really kind of naive to it? so my involvement as far from an entrepreneurial standpoint really wasn't any kind of grandiose idea. It was just a concept that came to me that I really felt moved me. And I said, look, I deal with this every day. And so do you. We've been bitching about this for, however many years we've been in practice. Now we can maybe do something about it and change the lives and maybe change an entire landscape in terms of the way things are done, because nothing's really getting done right now. There's one other company that's in the space. One of the larger dialysis companies has gotten involved with. It does use ultrasound, which I think is going to be an upfront hurdle for them. But it doesn't address the history. It addresses how you get in. And we can all get in. But like we talked about, if you get in the same place over and over again, that's still a problem. Yeah, you're in. You're still able to dialyze, but you're damaging the fistula in the process. So you need some sort of prospective historical register, and you need to have it so that it's easy to use, very straightforward and basic, and doesn't interrupt workflow, because they don't have time for that. If it's complicated and it's slowing them down, they're not going to adopt it.
Yeah. And what is your involvement with the company? Like, where do you provide value for the startup? And
Sure.
what are you doing for them?
So originally I was kind of an over-interested investor. And, just because we know each other personally, I just got more and more involved with it and wanted to do more to try to move the needle on it because I believe in it. And our other colleague happens to have a real job as well. And his real job, he got promoted and it got to be a real job. And he just couldn't spend the time. And so I kind of fell into that, and I became the VP for clinical affairs. And just, and so I said, look, let me help, try to write the protocols for the studies that we need to get done to prove what we want to prove, and get some paper in the literature and give us some background in that regard. And it's just another ear to bounce ideas off of. We have regular meetings. We've got a chief marketing officer who's got a lot of experience in startups, and we've got some other key people that Shannon knows from a previous device that he uses in pediatric dialysis catheters called the RU. And it's basically just something that goes on the catheter itself to try to help in keeping the catheter clean and maintainable. And so he gained some experience in working with, FDA, CMS, and sort of navigating through those pathways earlier on. And so we've been able to get a hold of some good people to try to help us. There's a lot of, it's hard. There's a lot of people involved. For us, there's developmental people in terms of software. There's, us trying to figure out, sales kind of marketing concepts and whatnot, and working with that, and having our marketing officer, but then also trying to figure out how to do more and more product development. We've got a concept now that is gone through FDA approval, got a breakthrough device designation, which is great, but we still want to make it better still. We still want to add to it. There's other ideas that we have with it. So, my role has just been kind of a catch as catch can, which I think is a lot. I've talked to other people who say, yeah, that's kind of not uncommon early on. You become a jack of all trades. And then as this thing grows, then obviously you bring in specific experts as you can afford to do so to help you with specific things and growth for the company. I think the hardest part really is just making sure you manage your funds.
Yeah.
Because it's run out of money.
Yeah, I was just listening attentively and wanting to build this storyline. When was this company founded, and what year? Give or take.
2022.
Okay. And you guys, I guess what financially, where are you at? So you had a pre-seed or a seed, and you've rounded up a few more dollars, or you've been able to bootstrap the whole thing?
We've been able to keep most of this through legacy investors that are local, strategic partners, in the sense that they are other physicians and other people in the medical business that know us and believe in us and have given us some funding. But we're getting ourselves set for that first Class A seed round, okay. And we're in the process right now of I can't say too much, but having some pretty strategic meetings with some pretty key people that we think will help us in pushing us farther forward.
Understood. And to just be absolutely sure, this is like a iPad-based or phone-based app that you, with a camera, are able to essentially create these tracks of where you poked in the past. Is that correct?
Correct. It's on the iPad right now, but it's actually agnostic to the kind of pad. If you wanted to use something that was droid based, or like you said, a phone, you could do that. I think the phone is probably a little small. I think it's better to have something that's a little bit larger screen for the sake of recording.
And so would you envision that other than the information that you're getting, people are going to potentially poke looking at the camera and guiding the needle by where they should kind of go? Or are you more like inviting people to use it and then mark like with a marker so that by the time they actually do the physical insertion, they know where they kind of want to hit? What's your vision there?
It's more about suggestion. It's more about giving them. So when we did our pilot, we had two different centers, and we randomized. Half of them were going to see the information when they're basically going to do their access. They were going to record the data points where they did the access into Veristra, which is the name of the product. But they weren't going to see it the next time the patient came around. In other words, they were recording, but they didn't have the information for themselves longitudinally to look at. They didn't have the history. And then the other half did. And the folks that didn't have it said, well, all I'm really doing is just recording what I'm doing, but I'm still flying blind. I don't know where it was I was before. I kind of remember, but not 100% sure. So it doesn't really help us. And we were seeing that, yes, there was definitely a difference for them between the two groups in terms of how they were doing the access. If they have a history and it shows them, what you would envision is that you come up to the patient with the pad, you've already booted them up from the list for your center. You clicked on it. Here's their picture. You look at their access. You look at the picture. Maybe in the picture, there's a hazard marker, because you can also drop hazards onto that, not just recording the points, but if there's a stent or there's a twist, or every time you access there, Mrs. Smith is going to give you a bunch of business, so don't do that because it hurts. Okay, great. You drop a little hazard there. You put a little note in, whatever that may be, but the hazard is always sitting there so people could say, okay, I need to avoid that spot or those spots, whatever they are. And then they can make a better, more well-informed decision about where have I been, where do I think I need to go today? And then they're just going to make those decisions. So they don't necessarily have the patient. This doesn't have to be floating over the patient.
I understand. So it's not like a live image that
they make one picture.
All right, because I was thinking in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna wand my arm.
Yeah, like AR.
And the app would like put the dots, and so then I would essentially poke, and I would be able to. But no, you're telling me it's a little bit even more simplistic, which is kind of like, I'll put it this way, kind of like when we're gonna do that lady that we know we've done 10 angios on, that we're like, what do we do? It would be dumb to not look at your old angios, right? Because the basis of the new angio is like, all right, let me see what it looked like at the end, and then you're like, oh, I know there's got to be a perineal, right? Like I was in it. So then you go to the angio and you just go for that perineal because you know that's where you went. So this is more about, here's where we've been, take a look at it, micro interpretation. Okay, I know where I'm going to go. And then you go and poke.
Right.
Okay. So then tell me about the is there a reimbursable action in all this, or there's no angle? Because in this show, we've learned throughout the, many years of doing this show, we've learned one thing about startups. It's the technology, is it useful or no? 2, is the team competent or not? Meaning the people behind it, driving it. And number 3, can you get paid for it? And if one of those 3 isn't in line, then the company doesn't tend to go that well. So do you have a reimbursable event within all this?
Yeah. So that third aspect, there's different ways to get paid. So if you focus solely on, I need a CPT code in the finite world of CPT, because if one comes in, one's got to go. So there's got to be a winner and a loser, right? So, and it's already competitive enough as it is. You're going to struggle, right? And the difference for us too is that we're not a widget. In other words, we're not something you're putting in the patient. We're not a physical device you're somehow attaching or involving the patient in. Correct? It's management. Now, we may get to that point, and that's certainly what our goal is. And to your point, talking about waving the magic wand, we can bring LiDAR into this, and that's part of what we're developing right now, is having the ability to basically have them come in, wave the magic wand over the patient, boom, there's the pictures. They know exactly, it'll help them in terms of recording their points so that there's accuracy. And people have asked us about the accuracy. Well, if you're just relying on that tech to just record on your screen where they think they poked, they could be off. I'm like, yeah, we've already looked at how far off do they need to be for it to be a big problem. And they have to be really far off. I mean, like outside the typical granularity of what you would expect when you're doing this access. So we're not worried about that. Our ad right now is really more in what we're doing to try to help. And we see the value, especially in the value-based care arms, with these capitated patients that, a third of these larger companies have to manage. They get a finite amount of money every year for these patients to manage them. And we know for a fact that they're writing off anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000 off the top as a cost, because they know that those patients are going to need, because they've done the data, they've cranked all these numbers. They know those patients are going to need interventions, and those interventions are going to cost. So they know that if they're going to get $100,000, what they're really getting is $65,000 for that patient, because $35,000 is going to be spent on maintaining their access. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if we can go to the value-based care arm of these guys and say, look, we can take your margin that you're writing off and maybe cut it in half and give it back to you. And oh, by the way, it could be better than that, because you're also getting turnover in your techs because they're stressed out because they don't know what they're doing in the centers, and they're watching somebody two chairs down bleed out from their worn out fistula, and or maybe their own patient, and it freaks them out, and so they disappear. That we can help you hold on to that stuff as well. Now, we do think that there's probably a mechanism downstream for a code. The challenge for us is going to be working through CMS as it relates to the bundle, because the challenge in dialysis is the fact that it's highly regulated. The margin is small, and anything that's new is looked at by that whole industry, if you will, as cost.
Yeah. So how does that conversation go with like DaVita, Fresenius, where I'm sure everybody comes to them and say, hey, buy this, it's going to save you money. And they've heard that before. How do you move the needle?
I think it's in making the comparison between what they have in their developmental pipeline for this kind of problem versus what they don't. We had a conversation with one of the larger companies. I like I said, I can't get real specific because I don't want to get anybody in trouble or otherwise create hate and discontent. But we talked to one of the larger companies, and when we were still in concept, and what was surprising to us was what we had: the CEO, the CMO for the US, the CMO for OUS, the CEO for OUS. I mean, worldwide, global, all these C-suite folks on this call with us in concept in Jacksonville. And what we realized was a couple of things. Number one, they only had one thing that they were in development of, and that was how to predict when to send a patient with a pseudoaneurysm to get intervention. Mm-hmm. We're trying to avoid the pseudoaneurysm in the first place, right? I mean, the whole goal was solve the problem at the point of care. Don't predict the problem after it's already happened as to when you want to fix it. Let's just not have it in the first place. So that's the only thing that they had in their pipeline. And they asked us a bunch of questions about IP because they wanted to know if we had our IP locked up, which we did, and we do. Yeah. And they said, okay, come back to us, when you've kind of run the gauntlet, which we did with the FDA. So we're setting up that meeting. And I think the ask on their end from our perspective is be a strategic partner with us. In other words, what we would want would be an investment into the company to say, look, and perhaps they write a first, not refusal, but write a first offering if this thing gets to where we think it's going to go. And then at the same time, open up your centers and let's crank some data. I don't need 5 years to tell you that this thing is going to make a difference in outcomes. We can do that inside of probably 6 to 12 months of data collection and another 12 months of going back over that and looking longitudinally at what their outcomes are like. 24 to 36 months max.
So in one of these big institutions, you're looking for a strategic partner that eventually will be an exit.
Mm-hmm. Well, It might be.
Yeah.
It might be something that we spin off even larger still. I mean, we have other ideas with Health Data Works. You notice Health Data Works doesn't say anything about dialysis. Health Data Works is the company. Veristra is our dialysis management software, but we've got ideas about what we want to use this for in lots of different areas in medicine that we think we can potentially make a difference in. So, Veristra is where we're starting because we feel like this is an unmet need. And frankly, think about it. We've set the bar so low in dialysis, it's almost ridiculous, right? It's okay to have a dialysis patency rate, a fistula patency rate of 50% annually.
Yeah.
Who does what? Like, how do you get away with that?
Yeah.
It's almost as insane as doing bariatric surgery where your success rate's 5%. I'm like,
Yeah.
and we still get paid for this?
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
crazy that all the research we do is around biology and technique, and there's no operational. Like there's probably
Right.
a large effect that could be improved with operations instead of like some drug that's going to modify smooth muscle cells. Yeah, something like this would probably have a way bigger impact and cost a lot less money.
Yeah, and the challenge
Yeah.
for everybody is that the FDA is still trying to play catch up. So you've got all these companies that are using large language model and all this technology trying to push forward a better way of doing X, Y, Z, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And the FDA is trying to decide, well, you know, by our usual rules, this wouldn't apply to this and doesn't apply to. There's a lot of roadblocks that inhibit. Not the least of which is the fact that, and this was brought up by Mehmet Oz and Marty Mercuri when he was still over at the FDA, was that they knew each other personally, could talk to each other, but yet the FDA could make a breakthrough device designation for a device, and CMS would take 3 or 4 or 5 years to figure out reimbursement, and that great device would die on the vine in the meantime because it wouldn't have any traction.
Yeah.
You know, how do we fix those things?
I'm going to be Montero Damas. You know, I'm going to go Nostradamus with Montero. I think that your company is eventually going to be bought by a company that is going to develop a whole re-engineering of access for dialysis, because I feel like this part that you guys are very well or have clearly solved in a way is a small fragment of, you know, the re-engineering that access units need.
Absolutely.
It's gonna
this is the first
involve
step for sure.
Yeah. So in my mind, I'm thinking you're gonna have to have, because this is what I think it should be foolproof, right? You should be able to send, because I've got patients now that do hemodialysis at home.
Correct.
So now we're like not even talking about nurses, we're talking about wifey, right? Now you got wifey poking this guy, and she's never like maybe she's even scared of blood, right? So can you foolproof grab somebody and then poke him in the most appropriate way possible?
Well, think about this.
That's what I think is where it's going to get.
Big push to home dialysis for good reason, right? Because the outcomes tend to be better. The guy that dialyzed on the floor of Congress in 1973, he dialyzed during the congressional session as an example to Congress when they were trying to get reimbursement through Medicare. He was an engineer by training, and he plotted on graph paper every access point he did in his access. And he'd had his access for years, right? He was the archetype of exactly what we're trying to solve. And that was in 73. What the hell have we been doing for the last 50 years? Nothing. Bupkis. We've been managing the after effects and trying to over-engineer the front end, hoping by some miracle that was going to salvage what happened in the dialysis unit itself. Yeah. So we're doing what that guy was doing. And I think this is part of a much larger whole. I think we could truly make this a entire management suite where because we have a disconnect, right? You, the surgeon, your colleague, the nephrologist, and that person, the patient in the middle, don't necessarily have direct conversation with each other. Yeah. And you're at the whim of medical records that don't talk to one another, because maybe you're on Epic and this guy's on Cerner or on Allscripts, but his office uses UptiScrunch Tech, whatever. They don't communicate with each other. We have a way, in the way that all of this code has been written for us, that we could drop this into Epic as a tab or Cerner as a tab, dialysis access. All those things are part of the bigger thinking that we can potentially do to say, look, make this comprehensive so that it's a no-brainer no matter where this patient is. Maybe this patient's living in New York City, but then comes down to Florida for vacation and needs to dialyze. They want to bring that record with them. They want to bring that notion of how well their access has been taken care of with them. And for us, we want to be able to then give them what they've never had in these dialysis centers or at their homes, direct feedback about how they're doing. Because there hasn't been anything like that. Yeah. It's always been a zero sum, like, okay, if the patient's bleeding, well, that's a problem, then they got to be sent out. But what are they doing in the meantime to try to prevent that in the first place? We have in our program, we have a score, an AI-driven score that we've used that helps them to try to grade their access in terms of looking at the Euclidean distance between these points along the center line of the fistula.
Euclidean.
Euclid. Remember Euclid?
Euclid. Geometry.
The Greek? Yeah. Euclidean distance. So the Euclidean distance between points.
Sounds like clitoris. That's all I heard.
So
it's the coffee, man. It's the sugar.
It's the surgeon in him. So it will tell you what the variability is and give you a grade between 0 and 1 being perfect. And you want something over 70% to show it gives them some feedback to say, okay, look, this tech in this particular center, this one's doing well. Their LADEX score, which is what it's called, LADEX, LADDEX. LADEX score is 0.8. But this other guy over here, his LADEX score is 0.5. It shouldn't be punitive. The idea is to say, let's go to this guy who's 0.5 and how do we get him to 0.8? How do we get him to 1? What is he doing that he's not? Is it his patient population? We can also grade the quality of the access per patient. So even though there may have been multiple techs accessing this fistula, it's still their fistula. It's their heat map. It's their information. We can look at that, or somebody else in another city potentially could look at that in a different center where they're going to dialyze and say, okay, here's what their fistula is like, instead of just plain guesswork. Because, oh, gee, we didn't know there was a stent in the middle of this because this person lives in New York and they happen to be down here on vacation.
Is there if in the app, sorry, real quick, I think if in the app you add feedback from the patient along the lines of take a picture of your arm, after dialysis, and the next morning, you would be able to, via artificial intelligence, determine if there's ecchymosis, determine if there's redness, puffiness.
It's interesting you say that because we can use this technology to track some things that we haven't tracked before. Like there's no standard grading. I didn't even realize this until I started diving into it. There's no standard grading for hematoma around fistulas.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I was really saying is because I think you have a vehicle to immediate reimbursement. So the moment that the patient gives you feedback, then you can have somebody should be essentially evaluating the feedback, which means that you have the capacity of doing remote sensing in a way, even though it's imagery sensing, you could do, because it's remote multimodal sensing that there's codes for. And I think if you add that, you actually have the capacity to accelerate your offering to say, we don't have a reimbursement for the little, geometric or the visual thing that the tech's going to see, but it actually enhances itself by the feedback of the patient. So now we know that if you poke here, the patient 80% of the times has pain and hematomas, which means there's something weird on that wall, get away from it. But then now you have a remote sensing, and there are codes for Medicare that you could actually engage in. So, maybe again, if once you exit this strategy, you can invest in Life of Flow. Well, since we're giving you all free advice today.
Right. Exactly. Consultant fee, man. Yeah. I like this. I like this idea a lot. I think it's interesting too. You said that like for the home dialysis, it was interesting in our center that we were doing the pilot in, the guy that was running the center was using our program to train his home dialysis patients. They would come into the center for a few weeks of training, and he was using it to show them, okay, we're doing this. Here's how we're doing. Here's why, and giving him, some feedback. I don't see any reason why this couldn't be done for home dialysis routine.
100%.
And then the patient really feels like they've got a leash, like there's an attachment to somebody that can help them if they're in a bad way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that also like there should probably be a component of patient empowerment where they know where their hot spots are, because we know that the patients come and say, don't poke me here. This is what happens when you poke me here. They are hyper aware of their own body. So, and
that's the hazard designator for that reason, not just, hey, there's a stent, but hey, Mrs. Smith doesn't like it when you poke here. Maybe there's a scar or a turn or something, whatever. At least you can document it instead of guesswork every single time.
Yeah, that's cool. Talk to us about running the FDA gauntlet. What does that entail? How painful is that?
Well, for us now, we're a class 1 device. We're not a class 2 device. So
Can you explain that to the audience what that means?
So for class 1, we're not actually telling you what to do, and we're not actually attaching anything to your patient. So it's a management thing. And so the rules are, I can't say, they're just different. It's just a different spectrum, right? If you've got a class 2, then what you're doing is you're going through a trial to demonstrate efficacy, safety. Then you get your 510K, so you could go ahead and then start trying to sell this thing, et cetera. For us, we went through, as what we went through the FDA process. It took about a year, 9 months. We had a couple of consultants that were certainly helping us, and I think that's important. Get people that have some experience in the paperwork, all that, the hierarchy, and understands that if you're going to do something like this. I think that makes a big difference, because you want to make them happy, but you also want to not leave things on the table, right? You want to make sure you avail yourself of every opportunity to get feedback from the FDA, give them what you need them to understand about you, feedback from them about what they need from you to make sure they're happy with it. Having the breakthrough device designator for us was a big help, in the sense that it gave us a lot faster track to be able to ask questions of the FDA. Instead of waiting 6 or 8 weeks, we could get an answer within 2 days. And I would like to see that be for, every device trying to come to market, or every company trying to bring something that they can have faster feedback to just understand what it is they need. That's why the process is so slow, because the bureaucracy is crazy.
Yeah. And can you tell us about how much money you burn? Like, if somebody has an idea and they want to go through FDA, how much money are they burning? Consultants, lawyers, all this stuff.
Expect that it's going to be 6 figures, but it's not going to be $1 million per se. I mean, depending on what your device is. For us, we were able to do most of what we needed to do for just at probably $1 million. I mean, from soup to nuts.
Yeah.
But again, class 1 device, little different scenario. If you're actually making something that you're either going to attach to the patient or do something to the patient with, well, then that's going to be a little bit different pathway. That's going to be a lot more expensive, just because of all the trials and requirements.
Even worse if it's an implant. If it's an implant. So essentially, a software is the easiest. Something that goes in and out would be kind of moderately complex, and something that stays in forever is very complex. I would put it like this: is and we
timeline.
We see that, and then safety. First in human studies have to go all the way up to 5 years. I mean, the standardization of all these things are a lot more complex when you're doing that. What I didn't know is that you could get a software to be a breakthrough device. That's new for me. I thought it had to actually be an intervention, like an actual device, because you don't have a device, right? You have what you have is a software application.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing too that's challenging, is that software as a service, SaaS type models can be very difficult to get reimbursed through the FDA, because I think they just unnecessarily devalue a lot of those things. They want something that's active at the patient, and that can be difficult sometimes to get them to understand and navigate. I mean, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
So what are the next big milestones here? What if you could envision what the next big steps, big tranches here that have to happen are what?
I think in the perfect scenario, what we would like to have is a strategic partner that would put forth some funding, but then also unleash their clinical access, i.e., to get a good trial done to demonstrate not just that we are pushing them to better behavior. We were seeing that in the pilot, and I think we can demonstrate that behavior change pretty easy and pretty early in the data set. But as we move along, what we're really looking for is a longitudinal study that will show that we're keeping patients in seats instead of in the hospital or in an outpatient center, and therefore reducing complications and better clinical outcome. Because if we can show that we're truly reducing that complication rate, reducing that intervention rate, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've said, look, we made this to accomplish a specific task that we had to prove was going to accomplish it. It's doing that. That's it. And then we move on to, either further development of that or on to other aspects of medicine we want to play with.
So how many patients do you think we need on the next? How many were in the pilot and how many do we need next?
Well, the pilot was small. The pilot was 26 patients, 634 accesses for data. And we were seeing a trend away from clustering, what we would call a hazard cluster, where you're getting more than 5 pokes within a small area over the fistula itself. And we're seeing that we're pushing them away from that critical hazard, which was good. So I think to do a larger study, we're probably going to need, it kind of depends on what you want to look at as far as endpoints. If you really truly want to look at complication rate, decreasing complication rates, probably need 25 centers that are in the study, 25 as a control group, recording all of those data sets and all those accesses over the course of about 6 months, maybe a year, but 6 months with what's average.
You probably need a couple of hundred patients. I would say you probably need a couple of hundred patients, like
correct.
200 patients.
Well, and I think we can do
in
that.
12 months.
I'm looking at the more that I can have to start gathering that data on, the better, because then it just means more granularity, looking for complications. If I've got 1,000 patients, I'm more likely to see a complication versus if I have 100. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I think it's important to nail the number down, because I always, I run Hendosin is my company out of Costa Rica, and we run feasibility studies and first in human studies. And this is really for anybody out there listening. Don't waste your time. Don't waste my time coming to me to say, hey, we want to go to Costa Rica. We want to do our first in human, because the first thing I'm going to ask you is, where's your protocol? Because the protocol, detailed protocol, like what is it exactly? What are your endpoints? What are you going to be ordering? What additional imaging outside of standard of care are you ordering, et cetera, et cetera? Because then based on that, I'm going to be able to tell you how much it's going to cost you. And so I think it's imperative, I'm sure you know this, but I think it's imperative for the company right now to say, what is the goal? How many patients do we need for the goal? And what is this protocol exactly to the T going to look like? Because then that's what you use to say, how much money do we need to raise? Because you don't want to necessarily raise more funds than you need. And you also, with a good protocol and a good pilot, you could get some non-dilutional, like non-dilutable or non-diluted funds, right? Like maybe you could get a grant for this. Maybe there's other things that you could get from NIH or from some state or from some PCORI, whatever. I think that's the strategy there. But I think it's going to be incredibly important to understand, because it's very different to do a 100-patient study than to do a 1,000-patient study, right? It's a massive amount in zeros that you have to write in that check to be able to get that, past the finish line. But very exciting stuff, man.
Speaking to that, and I know we're close to the end, but that study, the goal of the study is, I would imagine, for a company, is not necessarily like the science. It's kind of moving the needle as far as, investment, partners, the progression of the company, because, even though you would think it's the same, alluding to what Miguel's saying, like, 10,000 patients gets you a robust data set that can go into literature and do blah, 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 blah. But is that what you need to get you through your Series A and through, so when you think about the study, are you thinking about the Series A? Like, how are you thinking about it, and how does that orient how you design it?
Well, there's a couple different things to look at. Number one, the most immediate is, are we influencing behavior in a positive way as it relates to the way access is being done? Okay. I mean, at the very base, are we helping make the technical aspects of that access more reliable, reproducible, successful, longitudinal? okay, without creating all these cluster hazards and so forth. And then out of that, the next outcomes or the next endpoints really need to be looking at, well, how does that translate into outcomes? Because if the outcome is that patient needs an intervention, then and we're not moving that interventional requirement lower annually across the board, then we're not really making a difference that's worthwhile to the system, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to the dollars, right? Finite amount of dollars to treat a significant number of patients. They want to do anything they can to try to minimize that. And you know, and people can, and I'm sure I'll catch a lot of flack, I'm sure, in the comments about people saying, well, you know, dialysis is such a dysfunctional bunch of crap anyway, and all these companies are just out for their shareholders and whatnot. And to some degree, I don't disagree. And that's true. What I'm really looking at is if we can decrease the complications and we can decrease the amount of time that patients have to spend running the gauntlet through wherever they need to go to get this fistula taken care of, we're making a difference in that patient's life and lifestyle. Because it's already bad enough to be a dialysis patient. I don't think people realize how miserable it is to be a dialysis patient. And for so many reasons. And if we can have an effect on that that's positive, then that makes a difference too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really what, I mean, at the end of the day, if it's not patient-centered, we're going to die on the vine. Because somebody's going to come calling and say, wait a minute, seems like all you're really chasing is a buck here. What about the patient? What's going on with the patient?
Yeah.
So I would agree with you that I think that we structure this with the idea that we can change their behavior, and then ultimately the real goal is to get that 12, 24, 36 month timeline showing that decrease in complications and decrease in requirements for intervention, and that's really where the home run happens. But I don't know that we have to get to, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong here. I don't know that we necessarily have to get to that point to make this something that's attractive to any one of these larger corporations to say, look, we want to take this on. I mean, you have a way to standardize the way that we train our entire staff across what could be hundreds of centers. And oh, by the way, you also have a way for us to grade them. We can keep track of what these people are doing. We can by center, by tech, by patient. I mean, that management and that information is huge. We've never looked at how we do access as it relates to outcomes. And are there specific techniques that could be better? Is rope ladder the end of the game, or is there something else that we need to be doing? We haven't quantified what it means to have a hematoma. How big? How small? What does it mean in terms of outcomes? Don't have any of that data. Why? Because nobody's ever looked at it, right? So, big size of the pseudoaneurysms, where the pseudoaneurysms are. There's all these machinations that you could sit there and come up with as somebody who manages dialysis on a regular basis. Say, I wonder what, and maybe get that data out of our program, because we're actually going to look at that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think you're onto something. I think you're going to have a very successful exit. I don't know if you're going to be up there with Jeff Bezos after this one, but you're probably going to be maybe a little bit better than you are today. Yeah. And patients are going to be way better. Yeah. And we want you to make sure that when you do, having a liquidity event, that you invite us to the party, B, that you turn around and take some of that money and invest it in this awesome thing called Life of Full podcast that wants to take your money and multiply it for you, because we are too going to have a liquidity event one of these days after changing the rule. Anyway, Erin, this is your second and absolutely not your last show with us.
Around, man.
It's always an incredible pleasure, brother, and we love having you here, man. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Appreciate
it, Erin.
You guys have a great day.
Pura vida. Bye-bye.
Cheers.